You can't be here! Margaret yelled, grabbing my 5-year-old daughter Sophie's arm. Sophie has autism. Before I could get to them, Margaret dragged Sophie to the bridge and pushed her into the water below. My little girl screamed as she fell into the cold creek. Margaret had no clue she just hurt the sheriff's daughter. Before watching the whole story, write a comment about where you're watching from. Also hit like and subscribe for more stories. You can't be here, the angry voice shouted through the morning air. This belongs to the HOA. Get out or I'll make you. I dropped my coffee cup and ran to look out the window. My 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, was sitting by the creek behind our house. She was moving her hands back and forth and humming. She does this because she has autism. The sound of water makes her happy and calm. Sophie has been going to this same spot every morning for months. It's her most favorite place in the whole world. Sophie is special. Doctors told us she has autism when she was 3 years old. She doesn't talk very much, but when she does, her voice sounds like pretty music. She likes doing the same things every day and gets really upset when things change all of a sudden. The creek behind our house is now part of what she does every single day. She sits on the grass, listens to the water, and moves her hands. It helps her feel peaceful and good. A woman named Margaret was walking towards Sophie. Margaret is the boss of our neighborhood HOA and has lived here for 2 years. Everyone secretly calls her Karen because she acts like she owns everything. She's about 50 years old with short gray hair and always wears fancy, expensive clothes. She was waving, her arms around and yelling at my little girl. Sophie looked up with her confused brown eyes. She didn't understand why this woman was so mad. Sophie's world is simple and peaceful. She doesn't understand mean people or why people get angry. I ran outside as fast as I could. My heart was already beating super fast, but I was too late. Margaret grabbed Sophie's skinny arm with her strong hand. My daughter cried out in pain, a sound I had never heard from her before. Then Margaret dragged her toward the wooden bridge over the creek. Sophie's little pink shoes scraped against the ground as she tried to keep up. "Stop!" I yelled, but Margaret didn't listen. She was only thinking about getting my daughter off what she thought was her property. Sophie stumbled, trying to keep up with her little legs. She was wearing her favorite yellow dress with flowers on it. Margaret's face was red with anger. When they got to the bridge, she pushed Sophie toward the edge with both hands. The bridge wasn't super high, maybe 6 feet to the water below, but for a small, delicate girl like Sophie, it was really dangerous. The creek had rocks at the bottom and the water was freezing cold. Sophie's arms moved all over as she tried not to fall. Her face showed she was totally terrified. Then she fell. I heard the splash and her scared scream. My heart completely stopped. I ran faster than I ever had before. Sophie was in the creek, soaking wet and shaking. Her yellow dress was now muddy and ripped. She was crying and rocking back and forth. She had her small hands over her ears because everything was too much for her. The water was only 3 feet deep, but it was cold and moving fast. Sophie's lips were turning blue and she was shivering. I jumped down into the creek and picked her up gently. "It's okay, baby," I said, holding her tight. "Daddy's here now." She held on to me with her tiny fingers. Her wet clothes made mine wet too. I could feel her heart beating fast like a little bird's. She was still humming, but now it sounded sad and scared. I looked up at Margaret on the bridge. She had her arms crossed and was smiling like she had just won some kind of game. She didn't look sorry at all. "You should control your kid," she said in a cold voice. "This is a neighborhood, not a playground for kids like her. These special needs children are always causing trouble." Her words hit me like someone had punched me. I wanted to climb up there and grab her, but Sophie needed me more. I carried her home carefully, taking slow steps so I wouldn't slip. Inside, I dried her off with her special soft towel and wrapped her in her favorite purple blanket. She was still shaking and humming quietly. I got her favorite stuffed animal, a brown teddy bear named Mr. Buttons, but nothing seemed to help, completely. What had happened was too scary and fresh in her mind. My wife Emily was at work at the hospital where she works as a nurse. I called her, trying to keep my voice calm. "Emily, something happened. That HOA woman Margaret pushed Sophie into the creek." "Is she hurt? Is she okay?" Emily asked. Her voice was sharp with worry. She's not hurt on her body, but she's really scared. Don't let that woman get away with this, Emily said firmly. I'm a county sheriff and I've been a police officer for 15 years. I've seen drug dealers, bar fights, and even murders. But nothing made my blood boil like this. Margaret didn't know I was a sheriff. To her, I was just another neighbor she could pick on. She had picked the wrong dad to mess with. I checked on Sophie one more time. She was on our couch watching cartoons, still gently moving her hands. I kissed her forehead and went outside. I had my sheriff's badge in my pocket, but I wasn't ready to use it yet. I walked to Margaret's house 2 streets over. Her house was perfect. Cut grass, shiny mailbox, flowers in exact rows. Everything screamed control freak. I knocked hard on her door. She opened it wearing a crisp white shirt. She had a fake smile that went away when she saw the look on my face. What do you want? She asked rudely. Why did you push my daughter off that bridge? I kept my voice calm, but inside I was really angry. She was breaking the rules, Margaret said like it was obvious. The HOA clearly says that no children can play near the creek without a grown-up watching them. She's dangerous to herself and others. She's 5 years old, I said. She has autism, not dangerous. She wasn't hurting anyone. Margaret shrugged. Not my problem. If you can't follow neighborhood rules, maybe you shouldn't live here. We have standards in this neighborhood. You grabbed my daughter with your hands and pushed her into water. That's called assault and battery. Her eyes got wide, but then she laughed. Assault? Don't be dramatic. I was protecting the neighborhood from a disruptive child. I stared at her for a long moment. She wasn't sorry at all. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. She really believed she was right. I turned around and walked away while she kept talking behind me. She thought nobody could touch her. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Back home, I called my deputy, Mike Rodriguez. Mike, I need you to run a complete background check on Margaret Ellison, I said, giving him her address. Everything okay, Sheriff? Mike asked. Someone hurt Sophie today. I need to know who I'm dealing with. While I waited for Mike's call, I talked to neighbors about Margaret. Mrs. Henderson next door said, She's been nothing but trouble. She gave me a violation notice because my newspaper was on the driveway for 2 hours. The Garcia family across the street told me, She fined us $50 because our son left his bicycle on our front lawn overnight. Mr. Thompson said, Margaret threatened to have my truck towed because it was too old and ugly for the neighborhood. The Kellys said, She complained about our dog barking when strangers came to the door. Every story made me angrier. Margaret wasn't having a bad day when she hurt Sophie. This was who she really was, a bully who picked on anyone she thought was weak. Mike called back 3 hours later. Sheriff, this woman has quite a history. She's moved around a lot. 5 different cities in 10 years. What kind of history? Multiple complaints for bothering people everywhere she's lived. In Dallas, 3 neighbors filed complaints saying she was following them around. In Phoenix, she was accused of messing with mailboxes. In Denver, she got into a physical fight with a neighbor over property lines. Mike continued, In her last neighborhood in Austin, there were complaints involving kids. One family said she screamed at their autistic son for playing in his backyard. Another accused her of blocking their child's school bus. My jaw clenched. Margaret had a history of picking on vulnerable people, especially children with disabilities. Sophie wasn't her first victim. Thanks, Mike. Send me everything you found. I started planning my next moves. Margaret wasn't just a neighborhood bully. She was a repeat offender who had been getting away with this behavior for years. But this time was different. This time she had messed with the sheriff's daughter. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board. I wrote down everything that happened in detail, including photos of Sophie's scraped knees and torn dress. Mrs. Jenkins, an older woman who lives across from the creek, had seen everything from her kitchen window. I'll testify about what I saw, she told me. That woman is a menace. What she did to your sweet little girl is pure evil. The HOA board said they would investigate, but they didn't seem eager to take action against Margaret. She had handpicked most of them herself. So I took the next step. I drove to the police station and filed an official report for assault and battery on a minor. I didn't mention that I was a sheriff. I was just a father reporting a crime against his child. Days passed, and Sophie was still traumatized. She wouldn't go near the bridge anymore, even though it used to be her favorite place. At night, she woke up crying from nightmares. Emily and I took turns staying up with her, holding her until she fell back asleep. Sophie's autism makes it harder for her to process scary events. She couldn't understand why someone would hurt her when she was just trying to be happy. We started taking her to see Dr. Martinez, a child psychologist who works with kids who have autism. Sophie is showing signs of trauma, Dr. Martinez explained. Children with autism often have stronger reactions to unexpected, frightening events. It may take time for her to feel safe again. Every therapy session cost us money we hadn't planned. Every sleepless night reminded me of what Margaret had done. My resolve grew stronger. Margaret was going to pay. I continued gathering evidence. The Rodriguez family told me that Margaret had tried to ban their son with Down syndrome from the community pool, saying he was too loud. Another family said she demanded they remove their wheelchair ramp because it was ugly. I also discovered that Margaret had been lying about the HOA rules. I got a copy of the official bylaws and read every page. There was no rule against children playing near the creek. She had completely made up that rule to justify her actions. Weeks after the incident, the HOA board called a meeting. Margaret sat at the head of the table like she was still in charge. She wore a navy blue business suit and looked confident. I brought Mrs. Jenkins and other witnesses. I also brought something Margaret didn't know about: body camera footage. From a conversation I'd had with her 3 days after the incident. The meeting started with Margaret presenting her lies. According to her, Sophie was trespassing on restricted property and had accidentally slipped while Margaret was gently escorting her away. Then I presented the truth. Mrs. Jenkins spoke with emotion, but clear words. I saw everything from my kitchen window. That woman grabbed that little girl and pushed her toward the edge of the bridge. I've lived here 20 years and I've never witnessed anything so cruel. That's when I played my trump card, the body camera footage. Margaret's recorded voice filled the room. Kids like that are a burden on society. They make noise, don't follow rules, and bring down property values. Parents should keep them locked up instead of letting them run around normal neighborhoods. The color drained from Margaret's face. The board members stared at her in shock and disgust. I then presented all the neighbor complaints and Mike's background check, revealing her history of harassment in other communities. I showed them the official HOA bylaws, proving she had lied about the creek rules. Margaret Ellison has been systematically bullying this community, I said. She has a documented history of targeting vulnerable people. What she did to my daughter wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern. The evidence was overwhelming. I moved to remove Margaret Ellison from her position as HOA president, said David Chin, a board member. The vote was unanimous. Margaret was not only removed as president, but banned from serving on the board in any capacity. Margaret stood up, her face red with rage. "You'll regret this," she said, pointing at me. "I'll sue all of you." "Actually," I said, standing up as well, "I have something else to tell you." I pulled out my sheriff's badge and placed it on the table. The room went silent. "I'm Sheriff David Morrison," I said, "and you're going to be arrested for assault and battery on a minor." The look of shock and terror on Margaret's face was unforgettable. She had spent weeks thinking she was dealing with just another powerless neighbor. 2 days later, Detective Sarah Williams served Margaret with an arrest warrant. Margaret was charged with assault and battery on a minor plus child endangerment. The local news picked up the story. Reporter Jennifer Martinez interviewed Mrs. Jenkins and other neighbors about Margaret's history of harassment. The story went viral on social media with the hashtag #JusticeForSophie. Margaret's house became a target for community anger. People left angry notes on her doorstep. Someone spray-painted "child abuser" on her mailbox. Margaret hired an expensive lawyer who claimed I was abusing my position as sheriff. But the evidence was too strong. Multiple witnesses, video footage, and her documented history of harassment. The trial began 6 months later. The courthouse was packed with supporters from our neighborhood and disability rights groups. Local news covered every day. Mrs. Jenkins was the star witness. "I watched that woman grab a helpless child and throw her off a bridge," she testified. "It was a deliberate act of cruelty against an innocent little girl." The body camera footage was played for the jury, showing Margaret's hateful comments about disabled children. Several jurors looked disgusted. I testified about the physical and emotional damage done to Sophie. Dr. Martinez explained how traumatic events affect children with autism. Margaret's defense was weak. When she took the stand, she made everything worse by showing no remorse and continuing to blame Sophie's parents. "I was trying to protect that child from herself," Margaret said. "Children with those problems need constant supervision. If her parents had been doing their job properly, none of this would have happened." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Margaret to 8 months in county jail, 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service with disabled children, and restitution for Sophie's therapy costs. "Mrs. Ellison," the judge said sternly, "your actions toward this innocent child were reprehensible. You targeted a vulnerable member of our community and caused lasting harm." As the bailiff led Margaret away in handcuffs, she glared at me one last time. But I felt only relief that justice had been served and my daughter was finally safe. The neighborhood transformation continued after Margaret was gone. Her house was eventually sold to the Patel family, who have twin boys with ADHD. The new HOA, President David Chin, was fair and reasonable. One of David's first acts was to designate the creek area as a therapeutic space for children with special needs. They installed a beautiful bench near Sophie's favorite spot with a plaque reading, "A place for all children to find joy and calm." Sophie slowly healed from her trauma with Dr. Martinez's help. The nightmares became less frequent, and she began venturing outside again. The community rallied around our family amazingly. Mrs. Jenkins organized a fundraiser for Sophie's therapy. Kids drew pictures for her. Parents brought gifts. The most touching moment came when Miguel Rodriguez, the boy with Down syndrome that Margaret had tried to ban from the pool, gave Sophie a drawing of her sitting by the creek surrounded by butterflies and flowers. 1 year later, our community held its first annual Inclusion Day celebration. Sophie was the guest of honor, spending most of the event happily sitting by her beloved creek while other children played around her. Mrs. Jenkins gave a speech. Margaret thought she could break our community spirit by hurting our most vulnerable member. Instead, she showed us how strong we could be when we stand together. As I watched Sophie playing peacefully by the creek, surrounded by friends who accepted and loved her exactly as she was, I realized that Margaret had failed completely. She had tried to hurt my daughter, but Sophie was stronger than ever. She had tried to divide our community, but we were closer than before. Justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a jail sentence. Sometimes it's a community protecting its most vulnerable members. And sometimes it's watching your special daughter laugh and play without fear, surrounded by people who see her as a treasure to be protected. I'm a sheriff, but I'm a dad first. Nobody messes with my daughter, not ever. And now she lives in a community where nobody ever will.